Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Pathways to Develop Peer-Reviewed or Innovative Carbon Offset Projects. I'm Ruby Woodside from Second Nature. The speakers today are Tani Colbert-Sangri from the Duke Carbon Offsets Initiative, Barbara Heyer from UC Berkeley, Quentin Newcomer, who's been a member of the Offset Network Peer Review Committee, and myself. Next slide, please. So a quick thank you to our corporate partners, and you can go ahead to the next slide. Great, so the agenda for today, first of all, Tani will give an overview of the Offset Network and what this group has been working on for the past year. Second Nature has been working closely with Duke and the other founding partners of the Offset Network, and we're very excited to share these new creative pathways for schools to get involved with carbon offsets and develop their own local projects. So after the overview, we'll go into a bit more detail on some components of the Offset Network, including innovative offsets, how to write a project plan, and the process of peer verification. And then finally, I'll go over how these new offset types can fit within the climate leadership commitments. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. At any point during the webinar, you can submit your questions through the questions box on your screen. This webinar is also being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our website in the next couple of weeks. And with that, I will turn it over to Tani.
All right. Okay, excellent. Thank you. My name is Tani Colbert-Sangri, and I work as the program coordinator for the Duke University Carbon Offsets Initiative. Today, I'll be talking with y'all about the Offset Network, which is a web resource sharing platform and experience sharing platform for schools in higher education that have developed carbon offset projects, are thinking about developing projects, and looking to also inform the offset marketplace through the experience of our work, hopefully identifying some of the barriers that we can overcome to improve the offset market as a whole. Next slide, please. So whenever I have these conversations, I like to start with the definition of what a carbon offset is. So basically, a carbon offset represents 1 ton of emissions reductions measured in carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases. Basically, philosophically, the way I like to think of offsets, though, is that offsets are a tool that we can use to improve the adoption of climate change solutions through whether that is a behavior or speeding the adoption of a certain technology or practices. Once that technology, that behavior or practices has become ingrained in society, then it no longer represents an additional emissions reduction if you are to promote that technology that is already kind of the standard operating procedure, the business as usual. If you're promoting that technology still at that point, then it won't result in additional emissions reductions. So at that point, basically the point here is that the definition of a carbon offset is not static. It's a dynamic definition that requires you to assess on a semi-annual basis whether this project is still beyond what would have happened without the additional funding incentivized by it being a carbon offset. And once that is the case, you have to move on to identifying that next innovative technology or practice and promote that to incentivize that sustainable climate change mitigation behavior or practice. So when we got together within the higher education to think about how we could engage in the offset market, and from the context of hoping to achieve our carbon neutrality commitments through these projects that we were seeking to develop, we identified 2 key barriers that were really what was stopping the academic community from getting involved in this way. And those barriers were scale and complexity of the project protocols that existed currently, and also the cost of third-party verification, which on a project-by-project basis varies, but can be as high as $10,000 to $15,000 per project, and that's every time that you want to generate credits. So it's not even a one-time fee. So those are big barriers, and when we put our heads together, the solutions we came up with were developing a structure so that we could create some simplified protocols that were a better fit for the small and medium-sized projects that most of the folks in the academic community, with the carbon footprints represented by our institutions really represented. So trying to address that scale of the protocols issue, and then also to develop a peer-reviewed based structure for performing that third-party verification. So in terms of, so we spoke with lots of folks from the offset professional community. We spoke with the Climate Action Reserve. We spoke with the American Carbon Registry, among many others. And, oops, can you go one more slide ahead? Yeah, thanks. And really the role that we kind of solidified upon was acting for higher education to act as that knowledge generator. So we see ourselves acting as a test bed or an incubator to foster some of these innovative climate solutions and to encourage schools and universities to get involved in this space and try and promote some of these innovative climate solutions through connecting to research. The second role is focusing in on that research and development and trying to develop novel protocols. So in addition to expanding the types of protocols that are out there, which is the kinds of projects that are available to develop and to purchase credits from, we're also looking to develop guidance materials to assist in passing along the experience that project generators, project implementers have gained from years of developing projects and pass that along more widely to assist others in that similar pursuit. And then lastly, this is kind of building off of the two previous roles, but to expand the offset market, not just through pioneering projects and building more protocols, but also by identifying those protocols and projects that have struggled in the market. They've been accepted into one of the existing greenhouse gas programs, but for one reason or another, maybe there's only one project that has used that protocol successfully to generate credits, or maybe there's none. And so there's some barrier that exists with these project types that have really failed to catch on. And so that can be our role too, is trying to identify what are those barriers, how can those protocols be adjusted or improved, and then trying to chart the path towards scalability. This entire process, we've been working for the last year and a half to build this structure, and it's been an incredibly collaborative, iterative development process. And right now, we're really excited to be launching the pilot phase. So we've got a lot of projects that are, on the path to developing, to generating carbon credits. And then we're also launching and in the pilot phase of peer verification. We're going to look to everyone on this webinar, everyone within higher education, to continue acting in that role as for review of what we're doing, to engage with us and try and improve the projects as well as the guidance materials and the peer verification process. So we're really trying to build community around this and look to foster that sort of peer review collaboration that higher education does so well. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot here from offsetnetwork.org, and this is one of the project pages. As you can see, we've got some really great information here. You can get in contact with someone who's very knowledgeable about the project, can pass along the experience that was gained through that project. You can see what protocol they used, how many credits they've generated, what the cost of those credits looks like, how students are involved with the project. And then if you want to dive deeper, you can check out the project description document, the verification report. Really, this is the way that we're trying to highlight some of these projects while also passing along the experience that was gained through implementing them. Next slide, please. So this is another page on offsetnetwork.org, locate a protocol page. We've gathered here the links to each of the approved greenhouse gas market or programs, their protocol pages. So the 5 that we've got listed here are kind of the largest players within the voluntary carbon market space. That's the Verified Carbon Standard, Clean Development Mechanism, Climate Action Reserve, the American Carbon Registry, and the Gold Standard. Basically, when you have your project idea, you want to first check with all of these entities, and if you click on the logos on this page, it'll direct you to their protocols and methodologies web pages, so you can see if they have a protocol matching your project idea. If your protocol, if your project idea doesn't have a protocol already existing on these approved greenhouse gas markets and programs pages, then you can go down to the lower section here where we've highlighted some of the protocols that have been developed from within higher ed already. So this is like a second tier. This would, and we're hoping to build a larger library of protocols from higher ed moving forward, and this is where those protocols would live. So the last page I'll mention from offsetnetwork.org is the Develop a Project page. This is the page where you can examine what are the options for if you want to develop a project from your campus context. What does that look like? And there's this infographic featured on the page that I'll walk through right now that just on a high-level basis goes through what that entire process looks like. And later in the webinar, we'll be diving a little deeper into a handful of these items or components of the process. So the first step is you come up with your idea, and then you need to see if there's select the protocol that matches that idea. And the protocol is important because that lays out the instructions that you need to follow to do whatever exciting project you're hoping to accomplish, but document it and find the data in such a way that is going to allow you to produce carbon credits from that project. So you have two options through protocol selection. You can choose peer-reviewed, which requires that you choose a protocol that has been accepted by one of the voluntary offset marketplaces or the compliance market. Basically, just an accepted protocol is what's required for peer-reviewed through protocol selection. And then if none of those protocols fit your project, you can use a simplified market-approved protocol, or you can develop your own novel protocol, and that would take you through the innovative project pathway. Once you have your idea and you've found a protocol that you can apply to develop that idea into a project, then you would go ahead to submit your project plan. The project plan basically is the first attempt at kind of showing that you are familiar with the protocol and its requirements, that you know how to create this project, that you're approaching it in the right way so that the project will be a success and will generate carbon credits. You submit this project plan to the peer review committee. Sorry, that one section is a little small. And the peer review committee will determine whether the project is eligible for Offset Network and will offer any guidance and revision to improve the success of the project. After you've been approved, then you can build the project description document. You would submit that project description document and develop the project, but submit the project description document to offsetnetwork.org. And then after you've developed the project, you have the choice of pursuing peer verification, which is modeled off of the verification structures that Verified Carbon Standard, American Carbon Registry, all of the existing greenhouse gas programs use. So it's modeled off of what exists currently, but we've simplified the process where we thought it was appropriate and tried to remove some of the jargony language so that subject matter experts can really be the ones and students also can engage in this process and perform the verifications. So it's a pretty robust process, peer verification, but it does lead to generating carbon credits that you can use towards your AASHE STARS reporting goals, as well as the Second Nature carbon commitment. The other option down there, instead of peer verification, if you're looking for a less robust review process, maybe you don't want to invest the time that peer verification would require, and it's more for demonstration projects, you could pursue public assessment, which just requires 3 subject matter experts to kind of take an overall look at the project, or this could also be public assessment for a novel protocol or a novel guidance document, and and their review would live online on offsetnetwork.org, and it would also be available for public comment. You're not going to generate any credits towards carbon commitments or towards AASHE STARS reporting goals through this avenue. So on offsetnetwork.org, this is a screenshot here talking through that project plan, which is aimed at building the case for whether the project in question is eligible to be listed on offsetnetwork.org. We've got an instructions document, and we're working to build a template that should be out pretty shortly that will guide you through the process of developing that project plan. Really what we're trying to do with the project plan is ensure that before you invest time and money into this project, that it's going to produce offsets for you. It's going to accomplish its intended goals. We also want to make sure that you're aware of the paper requirements, permanence, additionality, verifiability, enforceability, and real, and how they relate to your project. And then also to identify any potential issues in fulfilling the protocol. And one other thing that's important to note here is that the project plan, all the work that goes into building the project plan will help towards the completion of the project description document as well. The templates are modeled off of each other, with the project plan template being a simplified version of the project description document. Next slide, please. So the project description document, we've got the same setup here, an instruction document and PDD template. And really the main goal here is with the project plan and with the project description document, we are hopefully making this process simpler so that students that are studying forestry can really engage in a forestry carbon offset project. By following these instructions, it'll lay out what needs to be included in their responses, and providing that uniform format and structure, we're really going to be able to ease the review process when you do eventually go for pursue peer verification later on down the road. So now I think I will turn it over to Quint, and I'll be back to talk about peer verification a little later in the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Tani. Hi, everybody. This is Quentin Newcomer. I'm based in Athens, Georgia. My experience with offsets is from the decade that I worked as director of the University of Georgia's campus in Costa Rica, where we ran our own in-house offset projects with reforestation and anaerobic digesters. And we developed a carbon calculator for the campus to track annual emissions balance. So that's kind of where I come from in all this. Next slide, please. So you've seen this graphic briefly, I think, at the beginning. As part of the webinar today, I'm going to focus next here on a brief overview of the first part of this infographic, the innovative offsets. Next slide, please. So the climate leadership commitment through Second Nature allows for Scope 3 emissions up to a total limit of 10% of total campus emissions to be offset by innovative projects. And although these aren't verified by an ISO accredited third-party verifier, just like with peer-reviewed offset projects, innovative projects must undergo this peer verification process that Tommy talked about in order to qualify for the carbon commitment goals. Because these aren't verified by an ISO accredited third-party verifier, the innovative offsets are not marketable. That means they can't be sold or transferred to other individuals or institutions. Although within our group, we are discussing, and that's a continuing topic of how accumulated emissions offsets through innovative projects might be used to serve as buffers for other projects and in other ways to support the project. But these aren't sellable or otherwise marketable offsets. So as part of the peer review committee's structure building subcommittee work, we developed an overview document to address these 7 bullet points that are up on the screen that are related to innovative offsets. And there's I'll invite you to check the Offset Network website. You can download a document and read more about all of these points at your convenience. I'll briefly go over those now in the next few minutes during my presentation. Next slide, please. Innovative offsets really reflect the spirit and culture that we find, or at least we hope to find, in higher education. Creativity and innovation and critical thinking, problem solving, applied research and experiential education. You hear all those buzzwords, and that's what we're really thinking about as we approach innovative offsets. We want to apply that to the inclusion of carbon offsets as part of this portfolio approach toward achieving our institutional carbon footprint goals. This is a wonderful opportunity for students and faculty and staff to collaborate, creatively come up with opportunities to expand the breadth of offset portfolio options, and take advantage of unique opportunities that may present themselves, either in your own backyards or, for example, on an education abroad program. One of the bigger picture benefits of this is to develop more case study examples for innovative ways to offset carbon emissions, just like Tani was saying. Innovative offset projects are essentially prototypes that we can pilot test and refine them, and then ideally incorporate them into recognized acceptable offset protocols, which may have more widespread application. The pilot testing phase through innovative projects helps universities improve efficiencies. Again, as Tommy said, one of the big barriers is financial and upfront. And if we can improve efficiencies in the pilot testing phase, that can help address some of these costs of developing programs. It allows innovative projects allow institutions to leverage research and instructional resources toward meeting our climate commitments without penalizing universities as first actors trying to pursue these novel offset projects that may involve developing your own internal methodologies and maybe not quite ready to meet the standards of existing greenhouse gas program methodologies. So we want to give a new and innovative pathway to do this. Next slide, please. Discussed innovative projects, we came to the conclusion that there are really three subcategories of innovative projects. One, projects which essentially tweak an existing approved offset methodology. Second approach, which adapt a best practice or maybe some other methodology used for a purpose other than offsets, but demonstrate how that could work in the arena of offsets. And third, some totally unique idea for carbon offsetting that we haven't seen yet. To be totally honest, we don't really have great examples of the second and third types that I mentioned, but we recognize the potential for these to develop. And so we hope that by explicitly describing these opportunities or noting them, we will open the space for such projects to be developed. I'd love nothing more than in 10 years to have a whole case study portfolio that flesh out all three of these sorts of innovative project approaches. But so I'll focus a little more on the first one since that is what we know more about right now. To give you an example of the first sort of innovative project, the Duke Urban Forestry Offset Protocol is modeled on established CAR methodology for urban offsets. Tani can go into more detail in the Q&A session if there are specific questions about this, but essentially they recognize that the CAR methodology had requirements that wouldn't have been acceptable given local municipal regulations and some other requirements. So they used the CAR methodology as a guide and then basically modified some of the details without compromising the integrity of the overall methodology. But that allowed them to then implement this modified protocol, taking into account these contextual obstacles that conflicted with the CAR protocol requirements. So that's an example of kind of how you would come up with an innovative protocol tweaking an existing methodology. Next slide, please. One main point to emphasize is that no matter what approach we take, innovative methodologies should still have substance. They should have a strong theoretical basis or a grounding that supports this approach. Ideally, they would refer to peer-reviewed literature and/or to existing case study write-ups which helps to establish the legitimacy of such a proposed approach. And as I mentioned, innovative offset projects are wonderful opportunities to pilot test these ideas. Essentially, as a new offset methodology is put forth, there will be initial field testing and review of this to support the methodology being widely accepted and then applicable for meeting emission reduction targets. So I'll wrap up my part of the presentation with another infographic that you've already seen in these earlier slides, focusing more specifically on this innovative pathway. Basically, the project proposers decide which pathway they want to follow, whether that's peer verification or whether that's for a public assessment route. For innovative projects, proposers may decide to initially forego the peer verification requirements, which allow offsets to count towards your Scope 3 emissions. And so instead, we've provided an alternative route called public assessment, which provides feedback to the proposed methodology, which then will help the project organizers to refine aspects of this project and then bring it up to the level of meeting the paver standards and thus establish an acceptable methodological approach to generate peer verified offsets. So I put in the dotted line feedback loop on top of that diagram from the very bottom where it says climate benefit and academic value back to submitting the project documents and developing the project, really to recognize that maybe an innovative project will have an initial year to follow the public assessment route, be refined based on the feedback that's obtained, and then resubmitted in a following year for the verification approach. The last point that I'll mention in my part of this presentation is what should be included in an innovative offset project document. And I'll briefly go over that. Project descriptions for innovative projects should clearly describe how the project either meets or is working to meet the paver requirements. The project description should also include methodologies for tracking and measuring offsets over time. The project description documents, the PDDs, should include sufficient referencing of the innovative methodological approaches to clearly demonstrate validity that the proposed project will generate offsets. And third, it's expected that innovative offset projects will include a section describing a transition plan for how the project will be evolved towards a peer verified and/or a marketable offset project in the long run. So that wraps up my part of the presentation. I will turn it back to the organizers.
Hi, this is Barbara Hayek. So I'm speaking as one of the team of people who helped develop the project plan documents. And I'll be speaking a bit about the project plan stage, if you want to go to the first slide. And I'll just add a bit to what Tani already presented. So after the project plan stage comes after you've chosen the protocol, either through the innovative pathway that Quint just described, or by choosing an existing protocol if you're going through the peer-reviewed project pathway. You can then submit the project plan for peer review. The purpose of the early project review is for you to make sure that your proposed project meets all eligibility requirements and that you have an accurate understanding of the methodological requirements and emissions reduction calculations early on before you advance too far in the project development. Next slide. So the purposes of the project plan review are the reviewers will assess project eligibility, that is the choice of the protocol for the particular project. The project will assess the project against the protocol's eligibility criteria and will look at your additionality screening. They'll also take a look at the emission reduction methods, that is the data sources you use, choice of baseline, monitoring plan, the way that you are calculating the emissions reductions, and any minor deviations you're proposing from the protocol if it's an existing protocol. Any major deviations would go through the innovative pathway and get an approved protocol through that pathway. And on the approval of the emissions reduction methods, it's really as much as you would like to get approved early in the process. This is mainly to give you early certainty that you're able to perform the requirements of the protocol and the program, and that you have a good sense of the quantity of credits that will be generated. Just a bit of a word about the additionality screening. Second, as already described, Second Nature currently restricts the quantity, the amount of peer-reviewed and innovative offsets that can be used, since these projects don't go through the established third-party verification. Additionality is one way that innovative and peer-reviewed projects can have higher environmental quality and certainty than registry projects. So additionality means the project is additional if the offset program or the involvement of the campus or those engaging in the offset project, if that engagement enables a new project to go forward, rather than just supporting a project that would have gone forward anyway. So when a campus is involved in the development of an offset project, the campus not only is able to make new projects happen, but that involvement gives greater understanding of the factors that went into project development, and therefore greater confidence that the project is additional, as well as that the project has other co-benefits. And in addition, as Quinn said, innovative projects have the potential to have much larger impact on emissions by demonstrating new technologies and project types and developing offset protocols. So as I understand, Offset Network hopes that as experience is gained with these methods, and as these methods are refined, that we'll see that peer-reviewed and innovative offsets have as high or higher quality than offsets on the market. Also, on the additionality guidance, Offset Network offers additionality guidance as a standalone module that will be on the website soon, that can be used by campuses to assess the additionality of offset credits they may choose to buy off of the voluntary offset market. Last slide. So as Tani mentioned, when you're ready to submit the project plan, you'll fill out the template here according to the information in the instruction document and the sample project that will be added to the website. And just to note, Offset Network sees this as a collaborative process and welcomes queries early on or at any time in the project development process. If reviewers have questions or see potential problems with a project plan, they'll come back to you with those questions and work with you to figure out the best way forward for a proposed project. And they're also in the pilot phase of testing out these templates and guidance, and they'll evolve as experience is gained with them. And I will pass back on to Tani.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is Tani Colbert-Sangri again from Duke Carbon Offsets Initiative. So we've mentioned peer verification a handful of times, and I think I'll just dive in and kind of explain really what we're thinking here in creating something, a novel solution for accomplishing carbon offset project verification. We wanted to make sure that what we're doing is transparent, and that particularly the way that we're authorizing individuals to act as verifiers, that there's a way for the public to get involved and comment on peer verifier selection, and just be involved in that process and have that information be available. So the way that we envision peer verification working is we really want students to get involved with this work. And the way that we've envisioned supporting those students through that work, whether it's an independent study or could be like a semester-long group class project, is that they would need to have a staff or faculty advisor. And that staff or faculty advisor would act as the peer verifier for that institution. And we would ask that staff or faculty member to complete a Google survey that we've got listed up on offsetnetwork.org. You can see in the screenshot there on the slide. And basically through this survey, you are asked to build the case. What's your experience? What's your expertise that prepares you to act as a verifier of another school's carbon offset project? These responses to the survey would be posted online. Every staff or faculty peer verifier would have a profile page up on offsetnetwork.org, and commenting would be available on that Google survey. Right now, I'm the only one with a verifier survey up online. You're welcome to check it out, though, after this webinar. And then the way that we're adding legitimacy to this process is requiring that individual who identifies themselves as a peer verifier to provide their stamp of approval on the work product that the students they're advising would accomplish through building that verification report, through conducting interviews and making a site visit to evaluate whether it's a legitimate project and how many credits that project should generate. A couple other points of interest here is that we're eliminating the massive cost of hiring an accredited third-party verifier, but there would still be the cost of student travel stipend, or that might also include the advisor if depending on the situation. And then conflict of interest is a standard part of most verification processes, and we think that coming from the academic community, developing projects from that context, we don't have the same requirement to definitively prove or go into an exhaustive conflict of interest exercise. But it is a critical component of the verification process, and I think it would be a valuable learning experience for students, and it's also a measure of legitimacy for the projects that are created. So that's something that we're working on building, is a simplified conflict of interest exercise that would be submitted in addition to the verification report. Next slide, please. So really with the verification report, we have the same documents available on offsetnetwork.org. We have an instructions document that is project type specific. So for urban forestry, that's the one we have available right now. It will list out all of the questions that the students and the advisor need to effectively answer and gather data for through the process of building that verification report. And that is through the combination of reviewing that project description document, from taking a site visit, and then whatever information gaps remain through stakeholder interviews. There's a template to kind of standardize those responses, and whatever the report determines was the impact of that project, that's how many credits would generate. And so the report would be posted online to offsetnetwork.org, and we're looking for public comment on those reports, and we're also asking the peer review committee, which is the academic group that developed this structure, to play an additional role and provide another layer of review on those verification reports, just to add more legitimacy to that process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ruby to finish us up. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. So now I've heard in a bit more detail about how these new pathways to develop peer-reviewed and innovative offsets can work, and I just wanted to bring it back to the context of climate action planning and climate leadership commitments. So just real quick, we've talked about this before, but the definition of carbon neutrality that is used in the commitments is that all emissions from Scope 1, Scope 2, as well as air travel and commuting for Scope 3 must be neutralized. So carbon offsets are typically used to reduce Scope 3 emissions, since those are the most difficult to eliminate. So that's kind of the broad climate action planning context. Next slide, please. And then a couple years ago, Second Nature facilitated an offsets working group that assessed how schools in the network are using offsets and whether or not there are more opportunities to do so. So this is where this idea of innovative and peer-reviewed offsets came from. The group really wanted to support the creativity and research capabilities of institutions. So what we decided on was that schools that are implementing the climate leadership commitments they can develop these peer-reviewed or innovative offsets, and they can use them to offset a portion of their Scope 3 emissions, as the other presenters have mentioned today. Next slide. So I did just want to provide kind of a visual to see what portion of emissions we're looking at. So currently our guidance says that peer-reviewed offsets can be applied to Scope 3 emissions, and they can comprise up to 30% of total campus emissions. And then within that 30%, innovative offsets can comprise up to 10% of total emissions. So that's what this image shows here. And then, once again, the reason for this limitation is that these offset categories are really new. And so we want to make sure that, that there's time to see that these projects are indeed robust and that emissions reductions are real and that the peer verification process is happening smoothly as we've imagined. So as we mentioned, these project pathways outlined by the offset network are new and we're kind of in the pilot phase, but I did just want to include some of our longer term future goals so folks have an idea of the direction that we hope this group will go in. First of all, we do hope that with time, as Barbara mentioned, it will be clear that these projects are very robust and that we'll be able to actually eliminate this 30% of total emissions threshold. It's possible even that these types of projects could one day be marketable, so they could be traded. Second of all, we do see these projects and new protocols as a pipeline for current offset markets. So for example, some of the innovative project protocols that schools developed, they could potentially be accepted by the major greenhouse gas programs. They could be used by other organizations. So I do see a lot of potential for some larger scaled impact here. And then we also plan to host yearly peer verification trainings, and there's actually one planned for this November. And if you have questions about this, I would say reach out to Tani directly. And then finally, I think that there is an opportunity eventually to expand these types of innovative and more creative offsets beyond the higher ed sector to the business community as well. So so that's just kind of an idea of where we hope this will go. And this is kind of the offset network right now is really just the starting point. Great. And so I just wanted to end with a few ways to get involved with the offset network. First of all, we're definitely always looking for new members of the peer review committee. So these are folks that have some experience or knowledge of any aspect of carbon credit projects or campus climate action. It's a relatively low time commitment, and the role of the committee is mainly at this point to review project plans to ensure eligibility. Another way to get involved is to have your institution become a peer verifier. So as Tani mentioned, the way this works for now is that a faculty or staff at an institution would become the main contact, and they would oversee students who are actually going to be doing the peer verifications. And then, once again, there's a online survey that asks some questions about experience with offset projects for interested verifiers. And then, once again, we'll be offering some trainings for peer verifiers. And then finally, a way to get involved is develop a project. We're definitely looking for projects. If you're interested in developing a peer-reviewed or an innovative carbon offset project, definitely please do so. Schools that develop projects now will really lead the process and set examples for other institutions. You'll have a chance to be kind of one of the first examples of how this could work. So I would say, if you're interested in piloting an idea, definitely let us know. And we're looking to help you through the process. Kind of once again, we hope this will be a very collaborative community and we can learn from each other. So next slide. With that, I'll wrap it up. We have about 10 or 15 minutes left for questions. So if folks have any questions, please go ahead and enter them in the question box on your screen, and we will answer some questions. So what types of projects would work for this? I think we mentioned a couple examples, but right now it's definitely up to schools to be creative. There are some examples that we mentioned that are currently on the website, such as tree planting and urban forestry. I think there's a protocol that Duke developed for that. Other options could be, weatherization or energy efficiency upgrades in local neighborhoods, or working with local farmers on land management to sequester and store more carbon. And then I think, as Quentin was saying, we really hope that schools will come up with new ideas or new technologies that we haven't even thought of at this point. So it's definitely up to schools to be creative. Tani, are there any types of project examples that you'd like to add?
Sure, yeah. So at Duke University, we're trying to work on some peatland, wetland restoration projects as well, and we'll be looking to engage the peer verification community to try and find a peer verifier for that project, and potentially collaborate on those projects as well. I think you pretty much covered it, that at this stage where the options are available for peer verification for any number of projects that are currently generating credits, or ideas for ways to generate credits in the future. So I don't want to necessarily highlight any of the other projects. I think the ones you did were great to give people a feel for what's possible.
Great, thanks. So there's another question about how to kind of track these peer verified credits and how to report on them. So one thing the Offset Network is really looking to achieve is transparency. So we shared a screenshot of the website where there's kind of a project page for each project. And so if you develop a project, all of the project documentation, and that includes the project plan and any peer verification reports that come from doing peer verification, those will be posted on the website and available for anyone to download. And that, on the website, on the project page, you'll also see whether or not any credits have been issued and if those are considered innovative offsets or peer-reviewed offsets. And so that's how they're currently going to be tracked. I think perhaps in the future, if we end up having a very large volume of projects and offsets, we might need to reorganize the website to make sure that it's still transparent. But for now, there will be a project page for every project. And then as far as for schools that are part of the signatories to either the carbon commitment or the climate commitment, as far as reporting this in your inventory, when you do your annual progress evaluation for Second Nature, there is a section of the report that asks about offsets, and there are categories there for innovative and peer-reviewed offsets. So what you would do is you would just report any offsets that you've developed and that have gone through peer review there, and that would adjust your net emissions accordingly. And I think looks like there's a question about additionality. So kind of what are some ways to know if your project is additional? So Barbara, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some of the ways that project developers can think about whether or not their project is going to be additional.
So we're developing, we have a set of questions in the project plan template that will help guide you through, and then we're developing an expanded guidance on it. And what we realized in writing this is it's hard to see very specific, a checklist if it's additional of this, it's non-additional if it's that criteria, that it's really a subjective judgment. So we came down to asking for people to understand, to learn about, if they don't already know, or to report on the reasons why the project went forward, the effect of the offset protocol or the offset program on enabling the project to go forward. And in the end, you'd be reporting on, or you'd ask yourself, how confident are you that the project really did need the offset income or the offset program or the involvement of the offset program players to go forward? The more specific types of questions to ask are looking at the finances of the project. Did the offset income enable the project to get financing? Did it provide enough income to really substantially improve the financial or the cost effectiveness of the project? And also similar questions about getting the project idea or the project off the ground with the involvement of the campus or those involved in the offset program. And there's more online associated with the project plan template, and then the guidance will soon be online as well. I'm also very happy to chat about this in more detail.
Great, thank you. So we have another question, which is, what exactly is the Offset Network? Is it a separate NGO or a loose network of schools? It's not a separate NGO. It's you know, network of schools that are working towards offsets. Duke, you know, Duke is doing a lot of the kind of hosting and organizing, but it's a, you know, network of schools. Is there anything you want to add to that, Tani?
I could talk about the history briefly. So the Offset Network was founded collaboratively by Duke University, Oberlin College, and the University of Florida. And those were the first three schools that were able to devote some time and resources to setting up the pages and reaching out across higher education to find those other projects that are listed on the site to really gather community members together. We've been working with Ruby and Second Nature since the beginning because this idea kind of came out of the Second Nature guidance document on how to use carbon offsets towards your carbon neutrality commitment. So they've been involved throughout the whole process. And yeah, we're really excited to see this building. And now that we have the peer verification structure added on to all of the project experience, I think this website is growing in terms of its functionality, and excited to see people begin to really engage with the site.
Great, thanks. And I do have another question for you, Tani. Actually, where can we find more information about the peer verifier training on November 8th? Could you just let folks know a few more details about that and where they can find out more?
Yeah, sure. So this training is following a training that was hosted last year in November at Arizona State University. They hosted a peer verifier training specific to urban forestry. It's definitely going to have you know, so this is a year later, and on the East Coast, hopefully we'll get a different mix of schools, some more, make it a little more accessible to East Coast schools. And again, it'll focus on urban forestry, just because that's the project that we've seen the most schools kind of start to engage with and develop projects around. At this point, we're going to be hosting it at Duke. We just heard back last week or 2 weeks ago that we received the grant that's going to make this training happen. So all the materials around registration, cost, location, lodging recommendations, those will be forthcoming, and we'll make sure to pass along information. We have your emails from the webinar, I believe, and we'll pass on information to you as soon as we you know, confirm the grant funding and develop those materials, and we'll be sure to pass that along.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple more questions about financial additionality. I wonder, Barbara, if you could talk, I think we've covered this a little bit, but if you could go into a little more detail about improving financial additionality. For example, you know, how do you demonstrate that for urban forestry, for example, that money was not originally intended to plant trees? Is that part of the additionality assessment?
So for financial additionality, so one rule of thumb is if for a project type that where the main revenue source or the main benefit is really the greenhouse gas emissions reductions, then it fulfills the financial additionality requirement most likely. For other projects, it can be a more involved analysis. I refer you to, Tani, remind me the name of the document, the verification, where you go into in detail for that specific project type, the types of questions and how to get information.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering.
Okay, I will find it, but we've gone through how to do it for that specific project type with detailed guidance, and I will let you know the name of that document really soon on the website.
And we can also share with folks who are registered. We can send out a guidance document where you can kind of read in more detail about specific project types, the different requirements for additionality and project eligibility. And then, you know, we're also available for follow-up questions.
Right. But one thing for the urban forest protocol you'll want to look at is what were the plans, or what was any existing project or tree planting before the offset program, and to have an understanding of how the offset income can really expand on the number of trees planted.
Great, thank you. So looks like we're about out of time. But I just wanted to thank everyone for joining the webinar, and thanks to the other panelists for talking about this. And I will say that this is the first webinar where we're talking in detail about some of these pathways, and I anticipate that we'll have future resources that go into more detail on different particular components of this. So this is kind of the initial overview. We're available for follow-up questions. We've received a couple more questions that we haven't had time to get to, but we can follow up via email to answer those, and we'll be posting the webinar recording online in the next couple weeks. So look out for that. And once again, thanks to everyone. And
one more thing, sorry.
Yeah.
The name of the document is the Validation Checklist 1.2 for the Duke Carbon Offsets Initiative Urban Forest Protocol.
Okay, great.
It's a validation checklist in the additionality section.
Great. Yeah, so that's a great resource to look for more information about additionality and the requirements of developing a project. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.